Welcome to the American Association of Anatomists Living History of Anatomy project. My name is Arthur Dalley, and I'm professor of cell and developmental biology at the Vanderbilt University School of Medicine, director of structure, function, and development, and director of the Vanderbilt Anatomical Donations Program. We are filming this interview at the Vanderbilt University School of Medicine here in Nashville on December 29th, 2009. I'm pleased to be interviewing Dr. Keith L. Moore, Professor Emeritus in the Division of Anatomy, Department of Surgery in the Faculty of Medicine of the University of Toronto, Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Keith is known worldwide for his research on the sex chromatin and his books on clinically oriented human anatomy and embryology. No Canadian, except perhaps the late Professor J.C.B. Grant, has done more for teaching clinical anatomy than Dr. Moore. One of his colleagues said, Keith has uplifted the profession with his outstanding books. In addition, his modest, down-to-earth personality and demeanor make him one of the truly great anatomists of his generation. Keith was professor and chair at the University of Toronto for 9 years and then associate dean of the basic medical sciences for 5 years. Before accepting the chair of anatomy in the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Toronto, Keith was professor and head of the Department of Anatomy for 11 years in the faculties of medicine and dentistry in the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Keith graduated from the University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario, Canada, receiving his Bachelor of Arts in 1949, his Master of Sciences degree in 1951, and his PhD in 1954. Afterwards, he was awarded a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship by the National Cancer Institute of Canada to study sex chromatin patterns in cells of human malignant tumors.
Thank you for that introduction. Some of those things are very pleasant for me to hear, but I'm very happy that you are willing to interview me for this because you're very busy. But we've been friends for a long time, and as most people will know, you're a co-author on 2 of my gross anatomy books, and have made great improvements in the books. I think that's.
I know we were hoping to have Dr. Ann Auger, who's the 3rd author on our books as well, included in this interview, but she unfortunately was unable to make it this weekend, but I know she wishes she could be here for this event. Now, Keith, I'm going to ask you many questions here. Sir Isaac Newton said that if I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. Whose shoulders did you stand on during your career in medical sciences?
Well, the first one was Dr. Murray Barr, who was my supervisor for both my master's and my PhD, and he taught me how to do research, really, and also how to give lectures and so on. So he was very important part of my development, and I appreciated that. And we worked together for, I think it was 6 years, working on the project of the sex chromatin, which we'll talk about later. The other one that was very important to me was Professor Ian McLaren Thompson at the University of Manitoba, Faculty of Medicine. He preceded me there as a chairman. But the one thing that I really enjoyed with him, in 3rd year of medicine, he would take the students over in groups of, say, 15 or 20 into the hospital and bring in a patient with a problem. For example, as one lady came in and she'd had breast cancer, so he would ask the patient what was her problem, and she'd say, well, I had breast cancer, and so on and so on. And after he'd talked to her for a while, then they would take the patient out, and then he would ask the students, where would the cancer cells go? Where would you find most of these things like that? And so this was my first real introduction to teaching of clinically oriented anatomy. When I was a student, they just said learn it, And if you ask them, I'd like to know why I'm learning this. Why is it important? They said, don't worry about that. You'll get that in your third year. And I didn't like that. So he then was very good. And then the other one was Dr. Duckworth. He was chairman of the Department of Anatomy just right after Grant. Professor Grant retired. And he had a memory. He could practically read the Gray's Anatomy. He was that good. And he was very interested when I was writing this book, and so he read all the manuscript. Every time I would work at night, late, 2 o'clock in the morning, and he'd come in and he'd say, well, what did you write last night? So I'd give it to him, and he'd go through and make suggestions. And that was very helpful. And then the other person there that I really thought a lot of, I first knew him when I was in the Navy, and we'll talk about that later. Dr. It was named Dr. McCrae. I forgot it so long time ago. But he, before I got to Toronto, he sent me a letter and said he would like to come in and work and teach in the department. He didn't want any money, but he wanted to be able to help students, because he said over the years he saw people didn't understand certain things, and that bothered him. So he said he'd love to help me teach that. So again, when I was writing, he would read that, and he was very careful to make sure that I wasn't saying anything that was going to be wrong for the students. So he was that. And then the final one that I had to mention there was my wife, Marion. She was a great influence to me and helpful to me. She not only had to look after our 5 children, but she worked and earned her Bachelor of Arts degree. And because she was reading the manuscript, I said, well, instead of taking that Mickey Mouse course that you get in arts, I said, take the first year of biology that the medical students take. And she took it. She said, this is kind of tough stuff. But she got through it, and we used to talk and help her. But it made it easier for her then when she was reading this manuscript to understand what I was talking about. And then she was able to criticize me, which sometimes she wasn't too tactful. And I kept saying, well, I'm not perfect. And she'd say, yes, but you don't have to keep proving it.
I know that Marion was, of all these people, that Marion, of course, was being your wife, was the greatest influence of anybody. And she was always your constant companion at meetings and so forth. And we'll probably want to say more about her later on.
I was going to mention that, sadly, she got colon cancer. And we thought that it happened to be a grade 3, which I never told her, but that's pretty serious. But she took chemotherapy for, I guess, about a year, and she was fine until one doctor said, you better go home and enjoy yourself for a couple of weeks. And Marion said, you mean I'm going to kick the bucket? He didn't know what that was. And but she was faithful right to the end, and she died about 3 weeks before our 57th anniversary. You know.
At the beginning of your career and how you started, would you tell us a little bit about your parents and their influence on your career?
Yes, they were very influential. My father was really an amazing person. He was the oldest of 13 children. His dad had 10 girls and 3 boys, and he was the oldest. So when he finished his elementary school, he had to go and work in a factory and give some of that money to raise all these girls that kept coming along. And but he did save money. So when he was 21, he went to high school, but he went to a private school because he saved enough money. Went to a private school. And he did very well there, and then he went to McMaster University, which at that time was in Toronto, and it's now in
Montreal.
No, it's in I can't think now where it is. It's Hamilton.
Oh, Hamilton.
Hamilton, yeah. Right. My because I'm 84, my old brain doesn't work as well as it used to. But anyway. The McMaster University was up by the museum there in Toronto, and he'd ride down his bicycle, and my mother was doing music in down at the bottom of this thing, and he'd go down there and listen to the music because it was free, and he met her, and he was 10 years older than her, but they got married and had 5 boys, and of course, Mother always wanted a little girl, and then he finally said, 5 boys. He said, "I'm not going to fill up the backyard with boys to get you a girl." So that was kind of, but he was very influential, and he wanted me to become a minister like he was. You see, he learned, trained after he finished his bachelor's degree in Latin and Greek. He then took 2 years of theology and became a minister, and he'd picked me out to do that, and he used to teach me. I knew more before I started kindergarten just from what he taught me, so he was very influential. And but Mother took her, she was the associate of the Toronto Conservative Music, so she was well trained to the top in piano and organ and singing and everything, and so, but he was very pushy a bit for getting me in there, and I didn't particularly want to go, but that's the way it was. But she finally would whisper in my ear, "You'll do what you want." So that was okay.
Did you have an early interest in medical science? Or?
Not well. I did, but again, Dad didn't. He was all for arts, and he kept saying, "Well, you know, that's good, but when you go to high school, you should take languages." So I did Latin, French, and German, and then he said, "You also have to take special courses on speaking, you know, public speaking," and he wanted me to do that so that I could preach, I guess, someday. And I did when I was only 12 years old. Went in a competition and won second with that, and I was scared.
Preaching,
speaking,
yeah.
But you know, so that was why I didn't. He never talked to me about science, so that's really the way that was. Yeah.
So what did you do after you finished high school?
Well, I went into the let's see, was it? I went to the services first, I think it was.
Did the Army?
I was in the Army for about 17 months, and then I went back to. They allowed me to go back and finish my high school, because I had done so well in these courses that I think they were going to have me for an officer. But instead of going back into the Army, I decided I would go into the Navy. And so that's really what I did there. And
in the Navy, you were in the medical branch.
Medical branch, yeah. And I joined in Toronto, and I was assigned to a doctor because all the recruits had to be examined. So he got me in, and he let me do a lot of the things, you know, take the pulse and the blood pressure and all that sort of thing, and so I learned a bit there.
And where did you go after this initial medical training?
After about a month or so, I was sent to Vancouver Island, and because there's a big naval base there, and I worked in the hospital on the wards, and I enjoyed that. They taught me how to put needles in and to do other things. And the one thing I didn't like was carrying out the
bedpans.
Bedpans. That was really awful.
And did you learn some radiology in that time?
Yes. Well, after I got over the ward in the wards, I wanted to get out of there, so I went down and into the radiology department, and he knew I was quite interested, so he said, "Would you like to come down with me?" So I went down with him, and he took me to the level where I was a radiology technician, and I used to take X-rays, because every time a ship came in from overseas, they had to take X-rays of these
chest
people.
X-rays. Yeah.
So sometimes there were 200 or 300 on a ship, and so I had to take all of those, and also I learned how to do barium drinks. Swallows, yeah. And then also you do
barium enema.
Barium enemas, yeah. And they don't do those sorts of things nowadays, but that we did a lot. And that's where I met Dr. McCrae that I had mentioned before. And so.
Were you ever assigned to a ship?
Well, I was eventually, yes. I always wanted to get a ship, yeah. And Dr. McCrae, I talked to him and said, "Well, maybe you could you could work this out to get me on a ship. I really wanted to be on a ship where there were doctors. You see,
Mm-hmm.
well, I couldn't get it, but they had this one ship. They said I could go on there, so I got onto this Castle class corvette. They were used in the WW2 originally to when the boats went over with troops, or they were taking food and so over for the troops. They used to go on and protect it from the submarines. And this ship came down through the canal to the west coast. That's where I was, in Vancouver Island. And this was a ship that was 250 feet long, which is pretty good. Had 93 men and 3 officers, and then you had people like me. I was the only medical person there. And then they had other people who were the cooks, and they had all that sort of thing. But because I was the only medical person, I was treated like an officer.
Mm-hmm.
And so they used to invite me up with the officers to get the good meals and good drinks and all the rest.
What were the most common complaints that you had to deal with on that type of duty?
Well, yeah, when we'd go into shore, and then we'd go out for 3 weeks. But after we'd been in shore, there were always about 6 or 7 guys that were sick for 5 or 6 days. You know, and nobody had any sympathy with them.
Seasick.
Yeah, seasick, and they'd go to the cook, and they'd go in there and get some fat, and they'd put it in, give it to this guy, or no, they'd go sucking it, blah, 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 and you'd get sicker and sicker. They'd have no sympathy for these people, and this went on.
Telling that the fat was a cure for it when it actually made it worse.
But it was a lot of fun.
When were you discharged from the Navy, and then what did you do when you got home?
I was discharged in 1946. Actually, I got a telegram from my brother saying that Dad was sick and had cancer. Where was it now?
A serious cancer. Isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah. It was. I'll think of it in a minute. But anyway, so I flew home, and I had trouble because when I went to the Padre to get a leave to go home and see him, they said, well, if he's that bad, he's going to die, and there's no point of you going. And I didn't think that was very nice
Not
from
very,
a Padre.
yeah.
But anyway, I got on there, and I was the only one on this flight. And in those days, small planes, and when you went over the mountain, you had to put on a mask with oxygen. And woke up in the morning, my face was all red because I didn't take it off after we got over the mountain. So that was good. But that's how I got out of the Navy again a little quicker. But he did live for about 2 weeks after I got home, and he was able to sign my forms to go to university, and that he was very pleased about that. But I didn't tell him. Well, I didn't. I still was going to do what he wanted me to do, but that was about it. Yeah.
And so you started at which university?
University of Western Ontario.
Yeah,
I really couldn't get into Toronto because I just came out of the Navy and so on. I missed 2 years. So when I joined in 44, 44, I guess it was when I went. And if you left to go into the service and you had an A, they made it a B because you weren't going for April and May and June. You see, so everything got dropped. So that was what I did. I started there, and my daughter always said she went to the University of Toronto. I said, well, I got here as the professor and head of the department, so that was pretty good.
Did the death of your dad make it difficult for you to pay the fees?
No, it really didn't, because I was lucky in a way. But when you were in the service, for every month you had of service, you got a month of university, and as long as you stayed in the top third of the class, they'd continue. So I got 9 years of training. They paid for all my fees, my books, and they gave me. They even paid for when you graduated, and they gave me $60 a month to help them live. So that was pretty good. But my brothers, I had 4 brothers in the service too, 2 in the Army and 2 in the Air Force. When they got out, you had a choice. So one of them took money to buy a car, another one took build a house, and and that sort of thing. So that was quite. I was lucky, I felt.
You may have been better off for having fewer options available to you.
That's right.
So when you got your Bachelor of Arts, what did you decide to do?
Well, I think the first thing I decided was to get married, because I had met Marion at a university dance, and it was one of those things that sounds kind of corny, but it was one of those things where we met and just hit everything off like great. And so we were going together for about a year, and I decided that if I wait 5 years, she's not going to be there. She was so pretty and so smart, so I wasn't going to wait. So we got married. And of course, my mother thought this was crazy. You know, what are you going to live on? I said, don't worry about that. But she did help out, and Marion's mother lived on a farm, so we'd go out there every 2 weeks. She'd load us up with a bag of potatoes and a bag of carrots and chickens and all kinds of food. And she didn't like the idea either, but it was a good job we did get married, because 13 months after we got married, we had our first son, who, you know, it was one of these gifts of God we didn't ask for, but we loved to have it.
And so, so then you, after getting married, you decided to work on a master's degree at that point?
Yes, I wanted to. I hadn't really thought about going to the medical school, because I didn't think I would get in with those grades. So I started in the zoology department, working for a very good teacher, Professor Helen Battle, who was a beautiful teacher. And so I took all kinds of courses in zoology, and I worked on zebrafish, where we're using teratogens to try to cause maldevelopment and so on. That was you know, very interesting. And
did you finish your work on teratology?
No, I'll tell you why that happened. She was going down to a seminar at the medical school, and she asked me to go with her, so I did. And when I got there, this is when Dr. Murray Barr was there, and Mike Bertram, who had been my teacher in first year university, he was there, and he was giving a seminar on the what we now call the sex chromatin, and I was very fascinated with that. And we stayed after and talked to Mike Bertram and Dr. Barr, and then when I went back and I was talking to Professor Battle, and she said, "You seem to be very excited about work, or that kind of work." And I said, "Well, it really sounds great to me." And she said, "Well, if you want to make a change, that's fine with me. It won't hurt my feelings at all." So in the meantime, then Mike Bertram, whom I knew pretty well, he called me up and said, "Well, Dr. Barr is looking for graduate students to work on this sex chromatin." So I went down, and he said, "Well, come on in," and so I got in there. So that's how that change came about.
So after you transferred to the medical school, what was your actual area of research?
I was asked to study this sex chromatin see, Mike Bertram only worked at the nerve cells, and as most people will know, he was the first one to notice this nucleolar satellite, which he called it, and so he was working on that. And the cats, what he would do is stimulate the hypoglossal nerves and keep stimulating, but he kept taking sections. I guess he would go so far, and then he would make slides from the cat, and as he did this, he found that this satellite wasn't staying beside the nucleolus; it was moving out towards the end. That's really what he saw there. So when I went down, he wanted me to study other cells in the humans and in animals. And where I got most of the thing in the human, I went to 54 autopsies in 1 year, and I would take specimens from all the different organs. So I was able to find out that places like the adrenal glands, or suprarenal glands as we now call them, that the sex chromatin there was very clear, even on dead people. But it was better, of course, if you got someone that just was there for a short time. And I had a friend in pathology, and he would call me when one would just came in. He said, "Come on, get down. This one's only died."
There was another autopsy.
That's right. And so I was able to do that. And in order to, he wanted me then to go and look at cells in cancer cells. That's where I got the
grant.
The grant for a postdoc, and I was working on studying the sex chromatin patterns in tumors. So then I had to take pathology. I took general pathology and then cancers pathology. And I used to read the slides, and then another friend of mine who I would read them, and then he would show me where I went wrong. So I got pretty good, but that didn't work out. They didn't see much. Once they had cancer, you couldn't really see the sex chromatin in a lot of cases. Yeah.
Now, initially, it was known as the nucleolar satellite. And why did they change it to sex chromatin?
Yeah. Well, as I say, as Mike was doing this, he noticed this thing going back and forth, and he had his notes, and he was very good, as any good scientist. He had a book, and he had them all there, and he looked at it, and he found that the only ones that had the sex chromatin were the female cats, and the males didn't. Well, you know, that told us that this was something to do with sex, because it wasn't in the males and wasn't in the female. So that was really why that. We then decided, well, we can't call it a nucleolar satellite. In fact, it was, what was his name?
Gall?
Gall, yeah, Romantic Gall. He'd named it actually the nucleolar satellite, but he didn't know what it was, and then he didn't see it moving. So we decided, well, let's call it the sex chromatin. And I wished we didn't. I tried to suggest we call it the X chromatin, because when you're talking in the hospital, and I used to go in, I'd look at patients that had problems, and when you hear this word sex chromatin, they thought there was something wrong with their sex. So I said we called it X chromatin, and they wouldn't do it. But I couldn't get Dr. Barr to accept that, and so that's why it was called that.
And did it become a clinically important structure? What was the function of the sex chromatin?
Yeah, well, the thing that was so important, and I got involved in a lot of this with hermaphrodites and people that were babies born with ambiguous external genitalia. But 1 in every 1,000 babies have external genitalia, as you probably know. Well, you can't tell whether it's a male or a female. So we started to, I would go over and get some cells from the umbilical cord and things like that. A lot of babies, I tested that, and I could tell the sex chromatin there. And so that was the first indication that this was, I know it was a female and not a male. And so we used that as a guide. We got to assign a sex, and you have to assign that sex within a week, because the parents want to know what do they got, a boy or a girl. So within a couple of hours, we could tell them that this was meant to be a boy, and we'll do it. But oftentimes, if the penis was so small, they would just turn around and make it into a female, take the testes out, because they weren't working. That's the reason they didn't develop that way. Yeah. So.
What was the first test that you used to determine?
Yeah. Well, after doing things like umbilical cord and so on, I decided that we could use skin, because the ones I was getting from the dead people, they were pretty good, but they weren't as clear. So I had another friend. I had a lot of friends there, and he was a plastic surgeon. So I said, well, would you mind taking some skin biopsies? So I had one taken off, and it left just a little scar. You can even see it now. And then I got Marion. She gave a piece of skin. It was only a little piece of skin, you know.
Conscripted the wife.
And then I didn't dare take the babies, but I did get medical students that volunteered, you know,
to have a skin biopsy.
you, and we did several, and we had it. So we saw there it was very clear, and so that was really the first test we had. We called it the skin biopsy test, and Dr. Barr was making a lot of trips and going over, And so it wasn't long before people from all over, I don't want to say all over the world, but certainly from Europe and so on, they would send, we'd tell them how to fix they'd take skin biopsies and send it to us, and we would go back and say, well, this is sex chromonin female. You know, we used to call it, if they had the sex chromonin mass, we would call that chromonin positive because it was there. And if they didn't have it, it was chromonin negative. So males are chromonin negative and females are chromonin positive. So we got these things coming in, but it got so that it's difficult to get somebody to give your skin just to test whether you're a male or a female.
So did that develop then into the buccal?
Buccal smear, buccal smear test, yeah, and that is really interesting the way that developed. I went to an AA meeting in I think it was 1951. I think it was in Detroit, and going around to the what do they call those? And they have the posters, yeah.
The poster
this one person had there, and she was talking to me, and she said, "Do you think that test would work with my ducks?" She said, "I'm working with ducks, and I get some of them. They're sort of intersexual, you see."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, you just pull a few feathers out and cut some skin out and take it around. "Oh, I can't do that with my ducks, you see." And I said, well, it's kind of fun. I said, well, why don't you just take a knife, or an ordinary knife, not a sharp one, and go in and scrape the inside of the beak and then spray that out, and then it'll work, you see. Well, then once I got home, I got thinking, yeah, that's a pretty good idea. So I went home and I started scraping the inside of my, using first of one of those wooden spatulas, or what
like
they call
a tongue depressor?
Tongue depressor, but eventually we used a metal
spatula
sort of thing to do it. And there again, Marion gave me some, and I did Pam that time. And
Pam was your daughter?
Yeah, Pam was the daughter, and so, but it doesn't hurt anybody. And I remember then Dr. Ham, who was a very famous histologist and had a great book. In his book, it said, you want to study the mucosa, and he'd just tell you to put your finger in your fingernail, scratch some of the cells, put it on a slide, look it under the mic. So I thought, well, here's a good idea. And that's so how it happened, just by accident, really. Well, that really turned out to be a really good test.
Yeah. Did you detect any abnormal chromatin patterns using this survey of human tissues?
Yes. And again, another doctor friend of mine was there, and he was actually an endocrinologist. So I was talking to him about this test and what might be used, and he said, well, you should be testing people with Klinefelter syndrome, because he said these people, they have very small testes, about the size of a marble, and they have high-pitched voice, they have no facial hair, and they're usually very tall. And he said, maybe there's something wrong like that. So I did the test, and it turned out they were chromonin positive. And so eventually, after a year or so, we started to culture the chromosomes and found out that these people with the Klinefelter had XXY. So they had an extra X. And the same in the female. They have two X's, and they only need one. So the one that's not being used curls up and forms the sex chromosome. So in these men, they had the extra one, so it formed the sex chromosome, because it didn't, they only need one X. And so that really, we didn't know. People wonder, well, how common is this? Well, I started looking at the books and so on, and said about 1 in 25,000 people have it. Well, I wasn't quite happy with that situation, so I went to the head of pediatrics and said, I'd like to do buccal smears in all the babies for a year. And he said that was all right as long as we got permission of the parents. And I said, it won't hurt the babies. So I went in, and the nurses held the baby, and they never even woke up. I had scraped the inside of their cheek, make on a slide and go. I think it was over 4,000 babies. And out of that, the female ones all were chromonin positive. And they're not always, women are not always chromonin positive. We can talk about that later. But I found out of 1,400, I think it was, male babies, that 5 of them had this sex chromatin. So that was worked out to be 1 in 500, which was quite different from 1 in 25,000.
Yeah.
So that was, I was the first one to use that test to check it. Yeah. So that
Did you do any studies of other persons with chromosomal abnormality?
Yeah. Well, after I finished that survey, I thought, well, I better look at some more people that were abnormal, and I looked at. Well, a lot of people said, well, maybe it was gay people. Well, I didn't think that, but I smeared a few of them. They were normal, so that got rid of that, because a lot of people said it was genetic, you know, and so on. But so it didn't. But then I decided, this is after I had gone to Winnipeg. I went to the mental hospital, and there are about 5,000 people there, and I went out and smeared all these people. And to check, although it was kind of funny, one lady came up and I said, I want to smear your inside, and then she wouldn't open her mouth, and so I tried to said, can I do it? No, I'm not going to do that. So then I just pulled her lip down and scraped her lip, and of course I was able to get a test. But I did, I don't know, a couple thousand, and out of that this was a strange thing. We get men would have XXY and XXXY, and then sometimes 4. And the females would have 3 XXX instead of XX, so they'd have 2 chromatin masses, and the ones that had 3 or 4, you know, it just all showed up.
Up to this time, that sort of thing hadn't really been documented.
Never documented. So that let in fact, Dr. Barr won an award because of that study, because I worked with him even after I left, and he got an award from the President of the United States, what was his name, Kennedy.
Oh, really?
And he went there and they gave him $25,000. Wow. And the reason was, you know, one of the Kennedy children had mental problems, and he was so good and proud of this work we were doing, because we said we hope this will help.
Yes.
Doing that sort of thing, yeah.
So who supported most of your research?
Well, the medical, what is it called? The
Cancer Institute?
Yeah, there was the Medical Research Council, and that was Canada, and then also the Canadian Cancer Society, mainly because of the study of the tumor cells, you see. Yeah.
Were there any other areas of science that you studied along the way, and how did this?
Well, there was the other test. We did see the skin first, and then we didn't stop that, and then we did the buccal smear, and then when I was doing these cadavers, I of course tested everything, and also I would scrape
from the autopsies.
Yes, yeah, I would scrape the cervix and the cervix, and so on, and those cells came out beautiful. I don't know whether it just seemed to be, like the
nucleoli.
So that was beautiful. Well, this really got the attention of the obstetricians and people like that, and it wasn't long till I got a letter from Dr. Papanicolaou.
Oh, really?
You remember the Pap smear, the fellow that developed the Pap smear? And he was very excited, so he nominated me for fellow of the International Academy of Cytology. So, so that I was very proud of that. But also, then he put me on the board of that thing, and he signed it, and that was something I really prized, to have a famous man like that. And the other thing that I found out when I read my book that I wrote on the whole sex chromatin, and we wrote a whole book. I had.
So this was your first book was actually on the sex chromatin.
That's right, and this was a book that I thought we had to do. And there was always this controversy between Mike Bertram and Dr. Barr, who discovered this, you see. So,
and it bears his name as the Barr body.
Yeah, they used to call it the Barr body. And of course, we, as working on the terminology committees, I didn't want to use eponyms, because Barr body, that's his body, but it doesn't tell you what it is.
Yeah.
So he finally said, well, he would say, we don't want to use that term. But it still hangs around. And you ask mostly people to talk about the bar body.
Yeah.
And
it's still a very common term today.
Yeah.
Did your research then stimulate your interest in lead you to start writing embryology books?
Yeah, it really did, because of I did a lot of, as I say, with the intersexual people and so on, and so I got interested in that, and I felt it was also important to have a book explaining the sex chromosome, you know, a little cell going out or a little mass going out. And so I knew a lot of people working in the field. So I think there was 26 chapters, and I wrote 6 of the chapters, and I also was the editor. But I had another 22 people, I think, writing different chapters, and Dr. Barr wrote a very good...
And this was the sex chromatin book?
Yeah.
Okay,
And he wrote one, and the one that was most difficult was the one that the story about discovery of the sex chromatin. So I did the first draft, then I sent it to Mike, and he said, well, I don't know, sent it to Dr. Barr, and then he'd come back and say, well, that isn't quite right, and it changed. It took eight shots before we got them to agree.
To who got credit for what.
But I felt it was important for Mike to get the credit. He was the one that saw it, and when same as when I did this buccal smear, Dr. Barr laughed when he said, that's silly, you know. Well, it wasn't silly when it became worldwide use. So that book, I don't know, hard to get now. But it was really wonderful, having all these people, you know. And that was the time when we were culturing chromosomes. And remember, when I don't know whether when you were young, but when I was young, they said we had 48 chromosomes. You remember that? You don't remember that? Well, then, back around, I think it would be about 1949, some people in Sweden or something found out when they did better cultures that there were only 46, and the reason there were 48 in the old days was because one of the chromosomes was splitting, you see, and it weren't very good. So that was quite interesting there.
Well, so when did you write your first textbook on embryology? Well,
it came out in 1973. I started to work on it in 1970, and the reason I did that was because the books of that period, there were good ones, you know. Hamilton Boyd and Mossman was a wonderful book, but they didn't have really any clinical relevance of abnormality to talk a bit about it. And the other one that was very strong was Langman's embryology, but he didn't have pictures of abnormal babies and so on and so on.
The congenital anomalies.
That's right. He didn't have that in there, and so I used to write notes, and I did notes for each area, and produced them and sold them in the bookstore for cost. With you know, they wouldn't let me.
These were more like a course note.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Notes, I mean, and we didn't make. I didn't make anything. Nobody. But I had pictures of babies that had cleft lip and all that sort of thing, and so one of the representatives from Saunders came down, and he went into the bookstore and saw this, and he came back in to see me, and he said, hey, you know, that's good stuff. You could write a book. And I said, well, I don't know whether there's enough for that. There's Langman's a good book, and all these others. I don't think we need another one. So he took it back and showed the editor-in-chief this, and it was interesting because that was Saunders turned down the Langman book. And he regretted that because it was very successful. And so as soon as this came in, he said, oh, this is good. And so he gave me everything I asked for, all the pictures and so on.
So was this the book that, was it called The Developing Human at that time, or is the one that became The Developing Human?
No, well, the notes were. And then, so when he agreed to do it, then that became The Developing Human. A lot of people, at least Dr. Thompson at the time where I was at Winnipeg, he didn't like that name. He said, just call it embryology. I said, that's not a very good name. It's The Developing Human. So that's how it got its name, yeah.
And then how did it come about that you wrote the smaller embryology?
Yeah, well, as you know, in most schools, we taught nurses, we taught physical therapy, we had a course in the sciences, you know, the arts and science and so on. And I felt the big book had much more information than needed, so I wrote the smaller book. Well, as it turned out, medical students got on that this had enough information that they could pass an exam. So they would buy the big one, but when it came to an exam, they could read the little book pretty well in a weekend.
A short period of time.
And so it really became successful. But the Developing Human is in the 8th edition now. The other one is in the 7th edition, and the Developing Human is very widely used, and it's been translated into 13 languages.
Wow.
And so that was, but each time, you know, if your book's successful, the publisher will give you more money, and so they let me use colors and so on at that time.
So at this time you were still at Winnipeg, if I remember right.
Yes.
So at what point did you when did you move from Winnipeg to Toronto, and what were your thoughts in doing this?
Well, it was, I had been offered, once that book came out, I started to get offers to wanted to go to Calgary, which is a good university. I was invited to go to Queen's, which was in Kingston, and where was the other one? Oh yeah, Hamilton. And I didn't like Hamilton because they were the first ones to have the, what is that program they have? They don't do class. They don't have lectures. They have large group.
Oh, kind of problem-based
learning.
Yeah.
And nothing. I'm nothing against that, but it didn't fit with me. Because then I went down and I said, well, I get a lecture. Well, you know, it's not a lecture, you see. And they used to invite me down. Don't call that lecture. Don't talk about this. And they didn't dissect very much.
Yeah.
So I wasn't happy with that, and so I didn't go. Well, then. Mike Bertram again, he was on the committee when they were looking for a new chairman.
At the University of Toronto.
Toronto, yeah. And there were about 8 people. One of them was Dr. Basmajian, you know, and he was very famous and was a graduate of that school. And so I didn't think I had a hope of getting that. But anyway, Mike called me up and he said, the dean's going to call you, and so he'll give you a chance to think about something like that. So anyway, that's how I went. But these other ones, every time we'd get an offer, Mary and I would sit down and worry for a week, what are we going to do? And it was really upsetting. So once that, we just said, well, if either Toronto, University of Toronto, or McGill in Montreal offer me the job, we're going. We're not even listening. So when this came along, we didn't have to worry about it. We left.
And did you enjoy being the chair of anatomy at University of Toronto?
Yeah, it was quite a challenge because at that time, and I guess they still have it. There was, you know, they don't have it. It's quite different now. But they had a histology division, and they had a head of that. And then there was the anatomy division, which was for gross anatomy and neuroanatomy and embryology.
Right.
And it was kind of hard because the fellow who was head of the histology, he didn't want to give up any things, and it was kind of difficult.
So
that
there were
way.
a lot of territorial
that was
turf battles.
But I handled that, and there was a lot of the histologists had a very good research program. The gross anatomy didn't have much. So when I talked to the dean, I said, well, this is a problem here. And so we talked out. He gave me 4 new positions, which is pretty good. So I hired 4 people who were very good researchers and also were good teachers. So I got those. And then I said, well, I have to have labs. So he gave me enough money to make labs for all these new people and so on. So eventually, we had a pretty good...
developed a strong program.
That's right, yeah. So.
Now, in the mid-70s, I know there was already, Dr. Snell had his first clinical anatomy book out, and there were several other anatomy texts published at that time. What made you decide to write another book?
Well, it was there again. A lot of these things are interesting, but after I got to Toronto, I think about a year after I got there, Sarah Finnegan from LWW, Lippincott, Williams and Wilkins, she came down, and I thought it was a routine thing, she came in and talked. She said, "Well, I really like that embryology
Said it was
book."
a book rep coming to visit.
Yeah, so she said, "Well, I really like that embryology book. It's giving us a tough time because Langman was done by them."
Yeah.
But she said, "It's doing so well. I would like you to write a book in gross anatomy using the same technique, you see." And so I said, "Oh, I'm pretty busy. I don't think I can do that." Well, so she made all kinds of things that she was going to give me money to get an extra secretary, and I could take any picture I wanted out of Grant's atlas, which we took quite a bit because they didn't want to spend a lot of money if it wasn't going to work.
So you're able to import illustrations from other LWW
any book I
sources.
wanted from LWW.
It was actually Williams and Wilkins.
That's
at
right.
that
It
time.
was.
Now,
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
So I thought about it for about a week, 10 days, and I said, I called her and I said, "Well, I'm thinking about this, but here's what I would want." And I went on and listed. I wanted 10 pages of color, which nowadays that's nothing, but in those days that was pretty
a lot,
expensive.
yeah.
And I said that I want it to be sold for not less than $28, and that was low for an anatomy book.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you got to keep it down, and once it gets doing well, you can raise the price.
So not more than $28.
That's right.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And so I got everything I wanted, and they paid for the artwork and all that for it.
How many years were there between the time they proposed the idea and it actually came out?
Well, I started it, or I said I would do it in 19, what was it? It was, no, 1977,
Yeah.
and it came out in 80.
Oh, okay.
And
So
it came out, interestingly enough, usually a book comes out, what, in February or
Yeah.
March? Well, it didn't come out till the fall because it wasn't finished. But they put it out and it sold 15,000 copies from that time, and that's not the time students buy books. So
Yeah.
it did very well there.
Huh.
And but another funny joke about that, we had it there at the meeting in April, and it was about this thick, and they're paid, but we had about that thick of empty pages to show them how many pages.
Oh, kind of a dummy book.
Yeah, and this,
yeah.
and this one guy came up to me and he said, "Well, you know, what's all these pages?" I said, "Oh, well, that's where you make your notes, you see." And he thought it was funny, and I thought, well, you know, no. And finally I said, "No, we haven't finished the book." So it hit off pretty well. And
how did you get the idea to develop the blue boxes?
yeah, well, again, I got to thank Marion, my wife. She did her bachelor's of arts degree when she was about 45, when she decided not to have any more children. And if she were here now, she'd be giving me the problem because she only wanted 3 and she got 5. But anyway, she wanted to go to school, and so she worked and took her bachelor degree, and she did very well with that. And she was doing clinical psychology, and the book they had, she brought it home, and this is very interesting, but they had yellow boxes, and they were talking about case studies showing how it was. And she said, "Well, you know, that'd be a good idea to work in your book." That's really how I got onto the blue boxes. Because before, probably I would have just had them in some different print, but I put them in blue, and they've stayed blue. So the students, they call them blue boxes.
Yeah, they're not clinical correlations. They're blue
in fact,
boxes.
we even have after Marion died, we had we gave an award, and it's called the Marion and Keith Moore Blue Box Award.
Blue Box Award, yeah.
And so that was quite interesting there, and she was very, very helpful to me, you know.
I know when I joined the team and started working with you, she was very much part of the editorial team. She did a lot of the proofreading and corrected a lot of our grammar and
the typing in those days.
The typing, yeah, that was before the word processing.
Yeah, that's right. It's
you've traveled around the world a lot to different meetings and so forth. Do you usually give lectures when you attend international meetings?
The last 5 years or so, I've been getting a lot of people wanting me to go. In fact, this last year it was almost ridiculous because I was invited to go to Ecuador, and went to the Quito, which is the capital, We had the meeting of the chairs there. We spent 3 or 4 days there and giving papers and so on. And went from there over to the Galapagos Islands, which was really, and that would take 20 minutes to talk about that, but it's really worthwhile. Anybody wants to go to it, and of course that's where the origin of the species and so on.
All of Darwin's work.
Darwin's work, yeah. So that was that. Well, then we got home and I was invited to go to where Robin Hood was. That's Nottingham. And I wanted to go there because I wanted to see that. Everywhere you looked, there were pictures of what's his name, the guy that was going stealing from
the sheriff of Nottingham.
Yeah, and one guy was stealing the money and giving it to the poor people.
Robin Hood, yeah.
Yeah. So and then we came home and we went to New Orleans for a meeting, of course, of the AAA. And then we went to Ohio, Columbus. No, it was Cleveland, Ohio. Yeah. And we came home. We went to Cape Town, South Africa for the World Congress of Anatomy. We were home 10 days and went to Istanbul. And I was invited to all these, and they paid my hotels and meals and everything. But I was at all these. I was mainly trying to speak and behave, keeping a good anatomy, because as you know, there are some schools that don't teach very much anatomy, and so and embryology took a real beating because a lot of schools didn't teach it, or
very reduced.
And as you know, in our book and in the book, the clinically oriented anatomy, we started to integrate the embryology. Now, if somebody said, "Yeah, but that's going to affect your embryology book," I said, "I don't care. They're not teaching it, so we get it in there." And so there's a lot of the embryology in our gross anatomy book. So,
have you? How many books do you think how many books have you written?
There's 10, I think.
10 different books.
Yeah.
And have you done work in other media besides books?
Oh yeah, I did videos, some of them at the university, and I did one in Chicago. We did it for March of Dimes, and they brought about 20 different specialists.
Now, were these embryology or gross anatomy?
I did I did the embryology, and they had obstetricians, they had surgeons, and so on. And then we donated that book or that video to March of Dimes, and it did quite well, and so on. But I also did movies. It was done. I did 6 movies. I had a contract for 32 movies, but the president and the secretary died within a couple of years, and so the other people didn't want to carry it on. But they're still, we put them on videos, and they're still available. But I wanted to do the whole thing.
And I know they've developed animations to go with the embryology.
Yeah, it took me about 5 years to get Elsevier to agree to do animations, because they're very expensive. But finally, because they have 3 books, they have ours, The Developing Human, and they have Larson's book, and then they have Carlson's book, and they're all embryology, but different.
All have kind of a different slant.
So I said, I went to these people, the authors of those others, and I said, let's go together. And then I said to them, you'll get 3 books that will use the same animations. And these are beautiful animations. They were done by David Bolender in Madison, Wisconsin.
He did the storyboard.
Yeah, and so the students can bring them up on their computers. But if any teacher, if they adopt the book, any one of those 3 books, they adopt that, they can get the maximized animation. So if you want to show it on a big screen or in a lecture, you can do it. And so that I think is something that's really important, and they don't charge for it. They give it. If they adopt the book, they get that animation. So
I know that you have been a member of the Federative International Committee on Anatomical Terminology for 20 years. And could you tell us a little bit about FICAT and what they do?
Yeah, well, I started that I think in 1991, I think it was, and I joined that committee, and it's a lot of work because we met twice a year for a long time. We did terminologica anatomica for gross anatomy, Terminologica Histologica for histology, and we just finished Terminologica Embryologica, so for the embryology. And what we were trying to do is to get all different countries using the same language. Now the basis of all that is Latin, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But then you'd find people who didn't know Latin, and they would try to translate it into English, and they would get it wrong. And I took Latin, but I still found it difficult when you get tensor fasciae lati, and I could remember if you misspelled that, you were docked, you see. So what we call that is tensor fascia lata, because that's a tensor that's pulling on that muscle. And so, but people they can use Latin mostly, or they can add some of the English in there.
Because it's a double listing.
That's right. And then for nothing, they can, if say the Russians took it, and they have the Latin and the English and then the Russian, and then you have Spanish and so on. So
they can adapt it to
so
their
there's
own
at least
particular language.
Yeah, so there's at least 6 or 7. So, and we don't favor eponyms, because, as you know, they don't tell you anything. When I worked with the National Board of what is it? The National Board of Medical.
The examiners.
Yeah, the examiners. I was on that for 4 years, and when I was there, they were talking about this one question they had, and they said 95% of the people fail on that. And I said, well, what is it? See, they brought it up, and they said, well, and one of the detractors was something. It's for the
Poupart's
ligament. And I said, well, there's your answer. I said, I don't know who Poupart is. I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
And they said, well, they should know it. That's the inguinal ligament, you see. And I said, well, no, but so let's put it on the exam. Everyone got it right, you see.
Yeah.
So that's where eponyms are really wrong, and many of them, Poupart wasn't the first one.
Yeah.
So
they often don't give credit to the proper person.
Mm-hmm.
You've been retired since 1991. What's kept you busy for the main part since then? I know.
Well, the large part is keeping the books up. As you know, we have 5 books. At least I have 5 books that are still in print, and so we just finished the large gross anatomy, and then and the ECA, the essential clinical anatomy. That's coming out in February, I think it is. Now,
4th edition.
Now we're working on the embryology, and I do the 2 of them together. So that I don't know how many. Sometimes I'll spend 4 or 5 hours, but when a chapter comes from my co-authors and so on, then I really work hard, and that's it. So that keeps me busy, and then I enjoy not having to go to all these meetings we had when I was a chairman and so on. But also I golf, and I'm doing pretty well. As I say, you know, I'm 84, and I can beat any one of my sons-in-law, and they don't like that.
Yeah. You mentioned, speaking of meetings, I know that you have quite an amazing record of attendance at the AAA meetings and so forth. It goes back to
I think it was 56, I think I joined, and I've only missed 2 meetings in all that time,
56.
And one of them was because I was working on the books, and another one I don't know whether I was sick or there was another meeting, but I always felt it was very important to go to that meeting. I liked it when it was just, you know, the American Association of Anatomy, but you know, the attendance was so small. They joined with the FASEB
toward the end.
And that works out. But you do a lot of running back and forth.
It's a much larger meeting now. But that means that you've attended at least 50 AAA meetings over the years, and I know you're also one of the founding members of the American Association of Clinical Anatomists.
Yes.
And you
I've
were
never missed any of those. Never missed any of those.
You were an honored member of that association. You received many awards over the years. Which awards have been most meaningful for you?
Yeah, well, the one that really I just couldn't believe it, and actually you were one of the ones that recommended it. This is called the Henry Gray / Elsevier Distinguished Educator Award.
Yes.
And I was the first one, as you know, to get that award. And I just couldn't believe it. It was just fantastic. They gave $4,000, which I didn't take. I took it back and put it into a publication award. They didn't like the blue box idea, so they called it what was it?
Is it also
Marion and Keith Moore. It wasn't Blue Box. It was, I think it was Anatomic or something.
For award for presentations
at
the meetings.
Then in addition to that, they give you money to run a symposium. So we ran a symposium on the integration.
This is on the Distinguished Educator Award.
That's right. So I did that. We did a symposium on the integration of the different aspects of anatomy, because
with embryology.
That's right, and histology and the whole thing, and that turned out quite well. The only other one I got just about a year ago, and I'm quite proud of that too. They started to have fellows of the American Association of Anatomists, and I was in that first group of people, a little pin, and what's her name? Andrea Pendleton says, "Make sure you wear that award." So, so that's really what it was.
Well, and now you're in the vanguard of the Living History project that is being done by the American Association of Anatomists. And so that kind of rounds out our questions. It's been very enjoyable speaking with you, and as one of the truly prominent anatomists of our era, it's great that we've had this opportunity to visit, and I appreciate the support of the association in having this project so that generations to come can look back on the history and the individuals that made these are the giants on whose shoulders they will be standing.
Sure. Yes. Well, I think it's a real good idea, because I remember, Grant, J.C.B. Grant, everybody remembers that, because during World War II, we couldn't get the books from Europe and so on. So he wrote the atlas, and he did a book called Grant's Method of Anatomy, and he was an excellent.
His was the first North American anatomy atlas.
Right. So I wanted what was I going to say now? If we'd had a video of Grant, what about LeBlanc? You remember LeBlanc from Montreal, McGill?
Yes.
He's probably one of the best scientists we've ever had in anatomy, and yet we have no record of that. So you could go on and on, the people, Russell Woodburn and Patton and all those people. So they're now, I said to my daughter Pam, I said, I think they've got me because I'm 84, and they figured they better get me before I die. So so thank you very much, Art, for taking the time, and also Chris, right?
Chris Adams.
Yeah, he's over there running
photographer. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you very much to the association. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, thank you.